During a time which has been unrecorded by history, a queen ruled over the land called the Northern Isles. The Northern Isles were a misty region surrounded by the sea, far from any other lands. The queen was called Larona by her people, and her name was respected among them. The people looked to her for guidance, and she ruled over them justly. Apart from her wisdom and kindness, she was also beautiful to behold. Her hair shined with the color of gold, her eyes were as blue as precious sapphires, and her skin was ivory white without flaw. For her goodness and loyalty to her people, when Larona died of old age, she was given a throne in the heavens and became a goddess. Her people she had ruled over as queen now worshipped her faithfully. 3 kingdoms were divided in the land the goddess oversaw. On the main island, the 2 kingdoms were named Calister and Adak. A small island beside was called the Kingdom of Ghent. The people of Calister were wealthy and lived in a comfortable village. The people of Adak were craftsmen and merchants. A marketplace in the heart of Adak provided for the people. And lastly, the island of Ghent was the least wealthy of the 3 kingdoms, but their military was powerful and their harvests were plentiful. These 3 kingdoms made up the realm of the goddess, and her people adored her. But there was evil in her realm, a being which sought to rob the goddess of her power. Far from the realm of the kingdoms or the land of the heavens, there was a place known as the Caverns of Rekos, deep below the surface of the earth, burrowing into the cold depth of the stone, finally drawing a center in the inner sanctum. Rekos was home to an evil being who had despised the goddess from the moment she received her divine power. It was a most powerful being, but it had a weakness: the light of the heavens. It fled from the light, or else it would be destroyed. But it was strong in the darkness, and in the night it was unstoppable. The evil presence knew that the goddess's people were loyal to her, but among them was a man whose loyalty was shaken. He was a man with a heavy heart, filled with spite. So the evil presence of the being in Rekos called to the man and drew him down into the depths of the earth, where the caverns spiraled down into darkness. And there, the evil presence gave the spiteful man power over the darkness in return for his allegiance. But this man could walk in the light among the people above, and he could stand in the presence of the goddess without cowering. The man accepted the power of the evil being and submitted to it willingly. The night flooded his being, and shadows were in his blood. His hair became as black as pitch, and his eyes were as hollow and dark as the caverns which sheltered them. He forgot the man he had been, and in the depths of the earth he became something new. He proudly renamed himself Dovain, meaning Lord of the Darkness. Dovain's strength grew, and with it so did his control over the power he commanded. When at last he had control over his newfound power, his spirit and body were divine in strength. Dovain turned against his master. The evil presence was defeated, but the strength of the being lived on in Dovain. As the sole ruler of darkness, Dovain returned to the goddess's land and walked among the people. He showed them his strength and the power that he wielded, and he promised them equal power if they would swear their allegiance to him. Soon, the goddess Larona took notice of Dovain and recognized the wickedness in his heart. So she banished him back to the caverns which could be reached from the forest in the western region of Calister. This forest she then named Exile. However, Dovain had already swayed many followers of the goddess to swear their allegiance to him, but he had taken measures to ensure their loyalty. So in pledging loyalty to the Dark Lord, each man accepted the seal of darkness upon his cheek. The seal must be burnt into the flesh with iron to ensure the permanency of their allegiance. The procedure is extremely painful, but brief. Once accepting the burn upon one's face, he or she is bound to the Dark Lord for the rest of time. Banished to the caverns below the forest, Dovain constructed a castle deep within the caverns of Rekos in the inner sanctum. Part of the inner sanctum where his castle stood became filled with water, which he could take from to drink or to bathe. A distant cavern became suitable for life, and 2 trees with mysterious fruit arose from the rocks. Despite his power, Dovain's form was still human and required nourishment. So, during the dark hours of night, Dovain would travel to the surface to hunt the creatures of the forest of exile above. To reach the surface, a narrow staircase of stone ascended from the caverns. His staircase was the only connection between the surface and the subterranean realm. The location of this staircase was a mystery to the people, but they were aware of the presence of the Dark Lord and feared his power. Dovain sent the men whose loyalty he had claimed into the goddess's kingdoms to corrupt her people. The men with the black ring upon their cheeks began to whisper words of corruption into the ears of the goddess's men. Lies over whose kingdom was favored most, which men were most exalted, and so on, became the whispers among the men. The conflicts grew into outrages, and the people started to despise one another. Above all, the people with the golden hair were hated the most. The people believed that because the goddess herself had golden hair, those people were favored above the rest for their resemblance of her. The people of the kingdoms spitefully called the men with golden hair the Favians, after the beautiful creatures of legend who would lure their victims to death with their beauty. The goddess looked down in agony upon her people as the dark-haired men fought against the gold-haired Favians. She searched for an answer to the struggle and found that she had one faithful follower left that had been untouched by the Dark Lord's corruption. She found him knelt in the temple which her people had constructed, asking the goddess for peace in the land. The goddess heard the man's prayer and descended to the temple to meet with him. He had been stunned by her appearance and fell to his knee in a bow and praised her. But she told this brave follower that it was in fact she that needed his help. She asked for the man's name, and he answered that his name was Altama. The man Altama was powerful, both in body and in spirit. He was a man of sturdy stature, dark eyes, and hair of a similar color. She found favor in him both for his loyalty and for his strength. From the light that beamed from her hands, she formed a silver battle axe that gleamed with divine polish. She told him that he must protect the Favian people from destruction and end the conflict between her people. She placed him as the guardian over her realm and sent him to where the Favians and the dark-haired men were battling in the eastern meadows. Blood had already stained the goddess's soil, and hatred in that place could be felt in the air. Altama's steps were guided by the goddess, and he walked behind her, trailing in her holy light. The people, preparing again for battle, turned their heads to witness this incredible sight. The land was silent in awe, and the goddess spoke to her people. She told them that she had given the man Altama power to defend her people, and that the battle must end, or those who rose against him would be destroyed. The men who were loyal to the Dark Lord Dovain saw the guardian Altama and loathed him, but those who were still loyal to the goddess bowed to this man chosen by her and laid down their weapons before him. Those who were still standing before him and shielding their eyes from his light were sentenced to banishment for their alliance with the darkness. They were sent to the forest of exile and were known by the seal of darkness that had been imprinted on the side of their faces. Cast out of the land, they fled to return to their Dark Lord. But the guardian Altama saw the forest of exile as a sacred place, because it was still in her land, despite the Dark Lord's realm being beneath it. So he gave the forest of exile to the golden-haired Favians to live in safety. They moved willingly to the woodland and protected one another against the exiles who roamed in it. The dark-haired and golden-haired people soon grew to accept one another and no longer viewed one another as rivals. However, the exiles had never fully retreated from the kingdoms as they were sentenced to be, and a new generation of their kind had risen deep within the forest where no Favian dared to journey. They willingly accepted the seal of darkness to be burnt upon their faces, and their allegiance was sworn to Dovain, who would never age a day beyond his years of strength because of the dark power he commanded. But the goddess had created a plan to protect herself and her people from the evil who dwelt beneath her realm in the caves of Rekos. She had made the guardian Altama the king of the island of Ghent. The military and the people of the island were at his disposal and obeyed him faithfully. She had also given Altama a wife named Tabitha. She fell in love with Altama, and he with her. They were married, and 2 years later, Tabitha gave birth to a son. They named their son Marcus. The guardian was proud of his newborn son and planned to raise him in the ways of the goddess. But Altama and his wife Tabitha vanished one day. It is rumored that they were captured by the Dark Lord Dovain and enslaved in the cavern of Rekos. But none can say, for they were never seen again. But their infant boy, Marcus, was left behind in Ghent, and he was raised by the men of honor. The men of honor were warriors that had received the highest ranking that could possibly be bestowed by the royal family. They were all well trained in battle, highly educated, and their service to the throne ended only at the point of death. These men took on the task to raise the prince, educate him in the ways of their people, instruct him in a military fashion, and give him the same discipline and training which they too followed. By the young age of 13, Marcus had an understanding of military that an aged king would be wise indeed to know. Having taken on the habits of his mentors, his countenance was stern, and he was a boy of considerable strength. Having oak-brown hair and similarly dark eyes, it is said that he greatly resembled his departed father, the guardian Altama. Marcus was also raised with the influences of his two best friends, the princes of Calister. Calister was the largest kingdom in the Northern Isles, and the princes were well known for being rascals. The oldest boy's name was Adakis, and the younger prince's name was Salvador. The young princes of Calister were raised with some knowledge of the histories of the land, but knew very little of the conflict between the golden-haired and the dark-haired people that had ended only a few years prior. Everything that the two brothers knew was taught to them by the scribe, whom they affectionately referred to as Grandfather Dovain, a kind white-haired old man. Many nights He would sit up with Adakis and Salvador to teach them the history of the lands, as well as teaching them some useful skills, such as reading and writing. Grandfather Dovain taught them of the goddess, and of the guardian Altama, which had brought peace to the land. He taught the princes many useful skills, and he spent his time tirelessly showing the boys ways to honor the goddess by serving her loyally. The two brothers did nothing apart, for they were the closest companions. Each night, after their lessons from Grandfather Dovain, Salvador would challenge his older brother to a game of Vortam, a strategy game. Vortam was a complicated game involving many different pieces of marble used to defend each player's one golden piece. If the golden piece was cornered, the game was over. Basically, the game required patience, premeditation, and intense focus. Salvador had never beaten his older brother Adakis in a game of Vortam before. But despite being smaller and quite frail, he was a determined child. Adakis never missed an opportunity to flaunt his unbroken pattern of success, and took pleasure in watching Salvador try again and again to beat him. When the two were not engaged in their studies or a game of Vortam, they would happily spend their time with their closest friend, Prince Marcus of the island of Ghent. Despite being a year older than Adakis, who was 12 years old at the time, and 3 years older than Salvador, who was only 10, the three of them were the dearest friends. On occasion, the three of them would sneak away to the dock of Calister, where Marcus would leave his sailing boat, which he used to travel from Ghent to Calister. Of course, the king and queen would be furious if they learned that their sons had been sneaking away to sail off in such a dangerous vessel. But the thrill of adventure washed away all fear of punishment. Marcus, of course, did not have this apprehension, for both of his parents, the king and queen of Ghent, had disappeared when he was an infant. When they were not scurrying off to the docks to sail out to sea, they would study together and share meals at the table. Adakis and Salvador loved their companion deeply and always looked forward to his visits, although never fully understanding that their companionship with the guardian sun had been fated with divine intent.